morning to you. How are you going to pay for all this?
Good morning. Well, the Prime Minister set out in February this year that the UK would be transferring funding from the international development budget to defence, reaching 2.5% of defence of GDP spend on defence by April 2027, with an ambition to get to 3% in the next Parliament as economic conditions allow. Now, that is a huge boost for defence spending, an additional £5 billion in the defence budget this year. And the Strategic Defence Review today sets out what we'll be spending that money on to keep Britain safer, to invest in new technologies, as well as supporting the brave men and women who serve in our armed forces.
Luke Pollard, is the review based on the money you have?
Well.
Is it based on the money you have now, or the money, the 3% that you would like to have in the future?
Well, I've got no doubt that we'll be moving into a 3% territory in the next Parliament. But the additional monies we have in the budget today, we have £5 billion additional.
This is really important if I come back on that. Sorry to interrupt, but let me just come back on that. The money you would like to have, or the money you definitely will have, is there a commitment to having that 3% from the Chancellor of the Exchequer?
Well, there's been no change in this policy since the Prime Minister announced it in February, and that's really important to say. What we're setting out today is what we're spending that increased defence budget on. The increase that I have in the budget in the Ministry of Defence today is being spent on new kit and capabilities, more support for our Armed Forces housing, an extra £1.5 billion going into Armed Forces housing this Parliament to deal with the scandal of the accommodation many of our forces live in, more investment in munition factories and in the 7,000 new weapon systems that we're buying to give our forces not only additional capabilities but to strengthen our warfighting readiness, because we know we live in more dangerous times. We know there are new threats to the UK and our allies, not just conventional threats but new nuclear threats as well, and that is why the Defence Review sets out not just the threat environment that the UK and our allies are facing, but how we learn the lessons from Ukraine, how we integrate drone warfare into our armed forces, how we can move that increased defence budget to British companies, making sure that defence can be an engine for growth, creating jobs right across the country. Yeah. And as you've seen from today's announcement this morning about the new nuclear attack submarines, that's a boost for the jobs in Derby that make the nuclear reactors and in Barrow that build the submarines, but for firms right across the country in the defence supply chain, doubling the number of graduates and apprentices involved with that nuclear submarine build programme. A really big boost for defence today.
Well, that's a lot of detail in one answer, but one that was missing was regarding my question. What I'm hearing is the Defence Review is based on spending 3% of GDP, but you can't commit to having that money. Have I got that right?
No, I mean, the position has not changed since the Prime Minister announced this in February. It's really important to stress that. I know there's a lot of focus on whether this is not
changed, then you haven't got a commitment to that 3% from the Chancellor, have you? You haven't got that money to spend.
Well, what we've set out very clearly is we're spending 2.5% of our GDP by April 27. That restores us to 2.5%, a figure not met in any of the last 14 years under the Conservative government. It means that we are moving towards a 3% spending in the next Parliament. And because of the work the Chancellor's been able to do in steadying the economy, in growing our economy, the fastest growth in the G7 now, I've got no doubt that we will be spending 3% on defence in the next Parliament. And the the Defence Review that we're publishing today, sets out the new kit and equipment, the new fighting doctrine, our new warfighting readiness that our forces will need to be able to deter the aggression that we're seeing from Russia that will keep the UK and our allies safe.
Warfighting readiness without more soldiers, though?
Well, I don't want to get into the announcements that may come later today, but what we are setting out is an increase in the capabilities and capacity of our armed forces to deter aggression. That is really important, because the key point about our armed forces is they should be able to defeat aggression if it comes, but their primary role is to deter any aggression. And as we're seeing from Russia in Ukraine, Russia attacking one of our allies, Russia attacking civilian targets, there's a real threat to NATO allies and to the UK, and that's why we're investing more in defence with this Defence Review. I
mean, you have shared a lot of the detail of the Defence Review before we've actually seen it, but I'll give you that one on soldiers. Maybe there will be an increased number of soldiers. You're talking, though, and your boss, John Healey, said at the weekend, this is a message to Russia. that we're ready in this new era of threat? We're not ready now, are we? Russia has been, well, depending on your definition, been fighting Ukraine for 3 years or 11 years since the annexation of Crimea, whereas it could take another decade to actually be on a war footing our end. If Russia wanted to attack us tomorrow, we couldn't do an awful lot about it.
No, I don't agree with that. As a member of NATO, we have the protection that Article 5 gives, that which an attack on one is an attack on all, something that is the guarantor of our security. But our investment in our independent nuclear deterrent is our ultimate guarantor of our national security. It's the thing that Putin fears the most, and that's why we're continuing to invest in that with this defence review today. But certainly, the situation we inherited in our armed forces at the last general election wasn't one that I was very happy with. Falling morale in each of our services every year for the last 10 years, recruitment targets missed by the last government in every single year when they were in power. Now, we are turning that around. We're closing the gaps on recruitment. We're keeping more people in service by paying them better, the second above inflation pay rise since we came to office for our armed forces already. And we're making sure that we are investing in the new kit and capabilities, such as the directed energy weapons that we'll be installing on our Royal Navy destroyers to be able to shoot down missiles and threats to our naval assets and to the UK homeland. It's precisely that type of investment that should give Putin cause for concern, to make him think again about threatening the UK. But we know that it's not just conventional threats that the UK needs to deter, it's also cyber threats. There's been 90,000 attacks from states on the UK armed forces cyber and digital infrastructure in the last 2 years, which is why this defence review, as well as setting out investment in the heavy metal of tanks, planes and artillery, also sets out further investment in our cyber and digital defences, because that has to be part of how we keep the whole of our society, the whole of the UK protected, by ensuring that we have digital resilience as well as warfighting readiness at the same time. That's what's in the Strategic Defence Review, and I encourage folks to look at it when it's published later today.
Even though you've shared a lot of it already, fair enough. We will certainly look at it later on.
There's certainly more in the Defence Review when it comes out later today.
Well, we'll have a look, of course, and we'll come back to you on that one. Look, just to finish, there's all the headlines here and all the money you want to spend, whether or not you have it. Do we have the resources here? Do we have the people to man that cyber command? And when you talk about getting factories, munitions up and running so we are on a war footing, who are going to own those factories? Is that going to be a national investment, or is that going to be an investment in existing companies like BAE Systems?
What we're seeing is that there's still a huge interest in joining the armed forces. 160,000 young people applied to join the army last year. We only converted 9,500 of those to be soldiers. So there's more work that we are doing, precisely why we're trying to deal with the retention.
More are leaving the army than are joining at the moment, aren't they?
That's right, and that is the crisis that we inherited. We're closing that gap. We're improving the conversion of people who are applying to join our armed forces. We're improving the offer in our armed forces, but we can't solve all the problems that we inherited overnight. But the Defence Review sets out that journey about how we're seeking to do that. But when it comes to investment in our industry that you just asked me about, it's really important that we move to an always-on position, because we've inherited stockpiles that are largely empty. We have quite correctly given a lot of our equipment to our friends in Ukraine to deter that illegal invasion, but we haven't seen them replaced. Now, today, the Defence Review sets out how we'll be buying not only new weapon systems to restore our stockpile strength and to provide added deterrence, but moving to an always-on defence supply chain. So we're not having the stop and start of defence procurement that we saw under the last government, but the ability for our forces to get the ammunition, the kit, the missiles that they need to keep our country safe.
Luke Pollard, appreciate your time. We will, of course, bring you that Defence Review live here on Sky News when it is announced, and we'll find out what else is in there that we haven't learnt about from the government already.